You've heard me mention Chilling before, the app created by horror enthusiasts for horror enthusiasts. But Chilling has transformed into a realm of terror. They've expanded beyond thousands of horror stories to bring you podcasts, short films, full-length features, and more every month. And now, Gale, Stay Away from Oz is an exclusive Chilling original film, reimagining the Wizard of Oz like you've never seen before. Follow Dorothy Gale's twilight years, marked by encounters with other worldly forces. Her legacy lives on through Emily, her only living relative. Emily's journey to confront Oz's horrors is a promise of absolute terror. Don't miss Gale, Stay Away from Oz, available and streaming only on Chilling. Use promo code GALE2023 for 50% off an annual subscription. All links down below. And now, before we jump into tonight's stories, let's check out an exclusive trailer for Gale, Stay Away from Oz.
Just relax. Listen to the sounds, the tempo, and just picture yourself there, in your dreams. Can you see it? Tock, tick, tock, tick, tock. Are you there?
Yes.
Emily.
Yes.
Gale. You're Emily Gale.
Yes.
And you say you're a relation of Dorothy's?
I don't know. Maybe.
What you have there is a handwritten early draft of Dorothy's first book. Her writings were all based on her dreams of a place.
Oz.
I feel this is the best chance we have to unlocking all of this. To finding the truth.
The truth?
Yes, about Dorothy, the slippers.
Stay away from us! Stay away from us! Stay
Your
away
dreams.
from us!
They're the key to all of this.
Stay away from us! Stay away from us!
Where am I?
Let's start at the beginning, and then you can learn for yourself.
This is the story of my last ever pizza delivery. Believe it or not, I actually kind of enjoyed the job. 90% of people who open the door to their pizza delivery driver are happy to see them, and all I had to do to get a good big tip was A, be quick, and B, just be cool with them and wish them a nice evening or whatever it might be. One of my best tactics was to be like, "What pie did you order?" Even though I knew damn well what their order had been. No matter what they said, I'd always be like, man, that sounds delicious. I might have to try your choice of toppings out when I get my break. Little compliments like that go a long way with some people, but a sunny attitude only let me down maybe half a dozen times out of literally hundreds of deliveries. Every time, before I knocked on a door or buzzed a doorbell, I'd think happy thoughts, fix a genuine smile on my face, then, hey, presto, I'd get the tip. For real though, I could count all my negative interactions on one hand. There were so few of them. But all it took was one big one before I started to question whether I was in the right line of work. So, it's your average Friday night. It's busy as hell, and when I walk into the shop, I immediately get hit with 3 orders. First 2 orders go nice and smooth, and I'm right on time to deliver the third and final order, so I pull up, grab my delivery bag, then walk up to the door. There's no doorbell that I can make out, so I just bang on the door until I hear footsteps coming from the other side. Then, when the door opens up, there's a guy standing there, in his 40s or 50s, I think, and he doesn't look too happy to see me. But then not only does he not look happy to see me, he asks, "Who the hell are you?" And this struck me as an odd question. I was wearing a hat with a little pizza logo on it, as well as a shirt, also with a little pizza logo on it. I also happened to be holding 2 pizza boxes, big ones too, so the fact that this guy was compelled to ask who the hell I was made it very difficult not to give some kind of sarcastic answer. Regardless, I just smiled and gave the guy a slightly awkward, "Did someone order a pizza?" This guy just stares at me for a second and then says, "Hang on," impatiently. Then he closes his door a little, and then I hear footsteps walking away from the door, presumably from the guy going off to find the person who ordered the pizza. I'm slightly concerned that it was, I don't know, a kid ordering without permission or something. If that was the case, and Dad was mad, I probably wasn't going to get tipped very much, and worst case scenario, he'd send me back to the pizza place after refusing to pay. That wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, as our boss generally let us eat anything that was going to waste. I also knew the order note said something about extra bacon, and who doesn't love extra bacon? Anyway, I hear the guy coming back, and I hadn't heard any arguing about any unexpected delivery or whatever, so I just get ready for the handover. But then when he opens the door, I don't see any money in his hand. In fact, he's got one hand firmly behind his back, like he's holding something he doesn't want me to see. Now right away, I start getting nervous. The guy doesn't seem any happier to see me, and he suddenly starts asking me all kinds of personal questions in a really confrontational way too. He says, "What's your name? What's the pizza place called?" And I answer him. And then he starts looking over my shoulder asking, "Is that your car right there?" I told him yeah, that I parked real quick to deliver his pizzas, and that if there had been some kind of misunderstanding, I was sorry and that I'd just leave. I had my eyes on where his hand was hidden behind his back the whole time, thinking, please don't be holding a gun. Please don't be holding a gun. He asked me one more time what my name was, and I told him, and then he moved his hand from behind his back. He was holding a gun, and as he pointed it right at me, I dropped the pizzas, then backed up so fast that I fell backwards off of this guy's porch. After I fell, he was directly in my face, putting the muzzle of the gun right to my head, saying, "Do you think I'm stupid or something, bro? Do you really think that I'm that stupid?" It was like survival took over. I just stayed perfectly still, then answered every question that he threw at me, no matter how rhetorical they were. He was beyond furious, like he was ready to pull the trigger at any second, and the whole time he's ranting at me, I'm just responding, "No, you're not stupid. I have no idea what's going on right now. I'm just the pizza guy. I'm just the pizza guy." I remember saying that last part, and how it made him even madder, and he yelled, "Pizza guy my ass," before pulling the gun back and smashing the muzzle into my forehead just above my eye. It hurt so bad that I could feel the bleeding before I saw it, just sort of a warm tingling feeling around where it hit me. It made me wonder if it'd hurt to get shot. In the face, I mean. Would it feel like getting punched by a freight train? Or would my whole world just go black and there would just be nothing else to feel? It sounds dark, but I remember thinking that it was probably the first one, that I was going to die because some violent schizophrenic was off his meds, and that it was going to hurt worse than anything I'd ever felt before in my short, pointless life. But he didn't shoot me. Instead, he asked me a question that confused me even more, while somehow making everything suddenly make sense. He asked me, as I'm trying to keep the blood from completely clogging up my eye, "Are you effing my wife?" No, I'm trying to make it sound nice for the people at home. And I give him another one of those survival sort of driven answers. "No, I swear, I'm just the pizza guy," praying that last part didn't set him off again. Thankfully, it didn't, because he seemed way too fixated on asking a bunch of questions that I didn't have the answers to. He asked me everything from, "Where did you meet her?" to, what does she call you in her contacts? I mean, this guy was fully convinced that his wife was cheating with me. Me, of all people, a friggin' acne-faced delivery boy. I just kept on denying it, over and over, feeling myself tremble and tear up as I kept expecting the guy to just lose it and just blast me. But he didn't. I don't think that it was that he believed me. I don't think he ever really thought that I was stupping his wife, and I say that because of the way he smiled when he saw how frightened I was. It was a smile of pure satisfaction. I remember feeling this overwhelming wave of relief as he got up and started walking away from me. I wanted to just get up and run, but for some reason, all I could do was keep perfectly still and watch him, like if I moved, he might change his mind or something. He grabbed the 2 pizza boxes, then tossed them off his porch in the direction of my car before saying something like, "Get your crap and get off my property." I grabbed them both, trying not to let any pizza spill. Then as I walked to my car, I heard the guy say, "You come around here again, I'll kill you." First thing I did when I get back to the pizza place was grab the delivery note, which was always stapled to one of the boxes in no particular order. I wanted to make sure I had the guy's address and phone number handy for when I called the cops, obviously. But as I pulled the note from the cardboard and before I slid it into my pocket, I took another look at the delivery notes that had been scribbled on the bottom. And it says, 2 times extra bacon, 2 times extra pork sausage, and it read, "Need ASAP, emergency." And that's when it hit me. This guy's wife hadn't ordered a pizza. She ordered the cops. Emergency? Double bacon and extra pork, ASAP? Not the most respectful way to refer to the cops, but pretty smart given what I'm assuming were risky circumstances. And once it hit me, I went inside and told my boss that we needed to call 911. And not for me, but for the woman that might end up getting killed if we didn't get someone over as fast as we could. The guy was obviously suffering some kind of manic or frenzied episode, and combined with what I suspect was a sadistic streak, whoever was sharing that house with him was not in a safe place. I had the cops come by my apartment a few days later to ask me a few questions, but other than that, I never heard anything else about it. I don't know what happened to the guy, what happened to the girl. I just know that I didn't want to deliver pizzas anymore after that. And before people go saying, "Oh, boo-hoo, you quit after one bad experience," it definitely wasn't just one bad experience. Yeah, most interactions were positive, but it only takes one psycho caller to change or end your life if you're that one unlucky delivery driver who just so happens to pick up their order. If that guy was a little angrier, if I looked like a little older or more like his wife's toy boy, if he'd been drunk or coked up or methed out or any other 100 things that might have pushed him to pull the trigger, I would literally not be around to even think about this, let alone type it up. So after thinking about it long and hard, I decided that I was never, ever going to be that unlucky delivery driver who ended up getting shot or stabbed or smashed off the road by some speeding DUI. In the years after I quit, I read about them sometimes. Someone getting shot or stabbed because someone was after their tip money. And my heart bled for every single one of them because I knew it could have just as easily been me. I delivered pizzas for about 18 months, and no ill will to anyone who's done it or still does it, but it was the single worst job I ever had in my life. First of all, you're in traffic all the time, which might not be so terrible in another city, but in DC, the traffic is the literal worst. Secondly, you're basically working for tips, or at least I was when I worked deliveries, so unless you're a real outgoing, people-pleasing type, you're in for a rough ride. But thirdly, and the biggest reason I grew to hate delivering pizzas, was the people. Again, maybe that's different for people in other cities. Maybe I should move somewhere where people smile or tip or bother to look you in the eye while they snatch the box out of your hand. I guess that sounds a little bitter of me, but I just had too many rude, no-tipping, side-eye giving door slammers to walk away from that job with a favorable view of humanity. But then, there were the deliveries that made all those rude folks seem positively angelic. I'd heard stories of nightmare deliveries, drivers getting robbed, drivers getting shot at after cruising through the wrong neighborhood, drivers delivering pizzas to sketchy parties where their idea of a tip was offering them a hit from a crack pipe, and those are honestly some of the less frightening stories. I heard way worse ones too, but luckily for me, they all just stayed stories for the longest time, right up until I rolled up on my own nightmare delivery. I don't think I was in any real danger, at least nothing I couldn't handle if things got physical. I'm certainly not about to pretend that this was any scarier or more life-threatening than the driver who had a bullet graze their scalp after some kids tried to rob them of their tip money, but still, if there was ever a delivery that made me want to quit on the spot, this was the one. So I ended up working what was a quiet Thursday night, just hanging out at the shop and getting maybe 2 deliveries an hour. Then I get this one delivery which takes me all the way over to DuPont Circle, and I end up pulling up outside this big, nice-looking townhouse. I guess that's another big thing with pizza delivery. Since everyone loves a good pie, or almost everyone anyways, you never really know what kind of place or what kind of people to expect. I didn't grow up in DC, and as much as I knew the city pretty well, it wasn't like I had the vibe of every address on lock just by reading it, unlike some of the other drivers. Anyway, I pull up, grab the pizza, walk up to the door, then hit the buzzer. Seconds later, this huge guy answers the door. A real wholesome-looking guy, wearing glasses and a sweater, but I swear he looked like he could have crushed my whole skull in one hand, like if the Big Show from WWE was like a homeroom teacher or something. He sees me, smiles, and then says something to the effect of, "Hi, thanks so much. I'm a little busy right now, and the pizza's for Mother, who's feeling a little under the weather, so if you head up and place it next to her bed, there'll be a big tip in it for you." I was always told never to go inside a person's home or apartment. Something about a liability issue, but I was also never one to turn down a few extra bucks by doing a little favor or going the extra mile. Or as long as it didn't cost me any time or money anyway. So instead of turning the guy down, I just asked which way to his mom's room and then headed upstairs with the pizza box in my hand. I get to the second floor, find the bedroom the guy was talking about, then I knocked on the door as not to startle or surprise anyone. I said something like, "Hey, pizza guy here. Am I good to come in?" But there was no response. I figured the guy's mom was older, maybe even a little deaf, but most probably sleeping if she was under the weather, as he put it. So instead of just leaving the pizza by the door and possibly losing a tip, I took a hold of the door handle and really slowly started opening the door. Obviously, the plan was to just slip inside, put the pizza somewhere sturdy, then slip out again without ever waking the dude's mom. But that's not what happened at all, and little did I know, I was walking into my very own nightmare delivery. The first thing that hit me when I opened up the door was the overwhelming pungent smell of air freshener. I had an aunt that used to smoke cigarettes in her car, and she used to hang a bunch of pine-scented ones from her rear view. All it did was make the car smell worse, like you could still smell the cigarette smoke, but your eyes were almost watering from all the pine-scented chemicals permeating the air. That's almost exactly what the bedroom smelled like, only instead of pine, it smelled really strongly of lavender. And as I pushed open the door and slipped inside, I realized why. I was more focused on not dropping the pizza, to be honest, so I was basically fully inside the room before I realized where the smell was coming from, and when I did, it stopped me dead in my tracks. All these little air fresheners, just like the kind my aunt had in her car, were hanging from the ceiling by their little loops. There had to be at least 50 of them, maybe more, all just gently bobbing back and forth like some giant crib mobile. I had no idea what the mom was sick with, but whatever it was must have been pretty bad to necessitate all these air fresheners. As I approached the dresser at the side of the room and sort of shot a look over at the bed, I saw this guy's mom wasn't sick at all. She was dead. This wasn't the first dead body I'd ever seen, but the other two have been at wakes or funerals, where the body is all dressed up with a ton of makeup on and all that. They make the dead look like they're sleeping, like it's peaceful. But death isn't peaceful or dignified at all. This lady looked like she died in pain, with her eyes wide open and her jaw slightly open like she was gasping for breath when the end finally came. The weird thing was, I reacted almost like I was still trying not to wake her, or at least that's what it feels like looking back on it. I didn't make any noise. I didn't drop the pizza box or run out of the room. I was too horrified by the look on this woman's face and also by the realization that all those air fresheners weren't for her benefit, rather the benefit of her son. He must have known that she was dead. That much is clear to me by now. But back there in the funky-smelling bedroom, I think a part of my brain just switched off as soon as I saw the woman's body. And by that I mean I didn't automatically assume this guy knew his mom was dead. After all, who the hell orders a pizza for their dead mom? I remember putting the pizza down, then turning to walk out of the room while thinking to myself, holy crap, I'm gonna have to tell this dude that his mom passed away. Then, as I was hit by this pang of guilt because I didn't want to be involved, all I'd wanted to do was deliver the pizza, get my tip, and leave again. I didn't have it in me to be this guy's one source of comfort after getting the worst news it's possible to get. I know, that sucks of me to think that way, but I guess the situation just went to 1 to 100 in a few seconds, and my gut reaction was to want to just get out of there. I'm sure yours would be too. But anyway, I'm walking out of the room, thoughts going at 1,000 miles an hour, when I catch the guy coming up the stairs. I don't know how in the world I'm going to say it, and the guy starts talking before I can even get it out. He thanks me for the delivery, saying something about how he's been busy at work and how his mom is a picky eater, so she wouldn't eat whatever he'd brought ingredients for. Then he asked if his mom gave me any trouble when I went in to put the pizza down. I actually stammered out a sort of, no, she didn't give me any trouble, and then fished around until I found both the words and the balls to tell this guy that his mom was dead. I tried to put it as delicately as possible, sandwiching the whole thing with apologies and commiserations and condolences and all that stuff. But then instead of rushing into her bedroom to check, or, I don't know, accepting what had probably been expected for a long time, he gives me this confused look and tells me, Mother isn't dead. She's just feeling under the weather. I just kept saying, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, and he walked into his mom's room. I actually started to feel kind of emotional. Again, the guilt came back because I was about to see something private, something sacred even. I wanted to run out of the house and never look back, forget the tip and just leave this dude with his grief. But then, and I swear to God, the guy starts talking to his mom in sort of a raised voice like she's just deaf, not dead. He says something like, Mother, you all right? And by that point, I'm still all in with thinking that this guy is just some poor dude who's about to get the worst news ever. He asks her the question and then pauses and then starts replying to her as if though she's actually talking. He says, Well, that's what I told him, but he thinks you're croaked. And then he let out this little chuckle like everything was just fine and dandy. I swear I felt the color drain from my face as all the pieces started slotting into place for me, and when they did, I swear that I've never felt anything like it in my entire life. If I thought I'd wanted to beat feet out of there before, after that realization hit me, I was about ready to throw myself out of a window just to get away from the guy and his dead mom. I'm not trying to say that he was some Norman Bates-style psycho about to start wearing his mom's clothes and murdering people. I mean, having your nearest and dearest pass away like that, I can't even imagine the mind-shattering grief it must trigger. But regardless of what this guy's situation was, I just did not want to be a part of it. I felt bad for him. I felt really bad for him. But in the same time, he was definitely not in the right frame of mind. I don't know whether that made him dangerous or not. I still don't know to this day, to be honest, but I wasn't about to hang around and take that risk. There was already one dead body in the house. I didn't want to be the second, you know. So as I was saying, the guy talked to his dead mom, then apparently heard her talking back to him like everything was okay. I remember keeping it as polite as possible as I told the guy I was going to leave. I'd completely abandoned the idea of getting any kind of tip. My first and foremost priority was just getting out of there. But then as I edged towards the stairs and the front door at the bottom, the guy says to me, "Don't you want to stay and help feed her?" I had no idea what to say to that, honestly, but I also didn't want to just walk away and risk angering this guy, so I remember just standing there, looking at him, completely dumbfounded. I guess my expression betrayed what I wanted to say because, as we exchanged glances, the guy's face went from cheerful to, well, not cheerful. He didn't seem angry so much as he seemed insulted, like really insulted. I guess that's probably the same thing, but he didn't snap at me or lash out at me. He just stared at me with this disapproving expression before he finally spoke up. "If you don't stay and feed her, there will be no tip for you." When I told him I was sorry for the confusion, but that I had to leave as I had other deliveries to make, I remember stammering out like, "I'm so sorry, but I gotta go." And he replied, "Oh, I think you better." When I arrived back at the pizza place again, my boss and coworkers knew something had happened. I guess I was still white as a sheet, or looked like I'd seen a ghost or something. I guess in a matter of speaking, I actually had. I told them the story, every detail, then told my boss I wasn't going to deliver anything else to that house. He okayed it, then blacklisted the address entirely. He was a good boss like that, never tolerated any threats or aggressive behavior towards his drivers or staff. I suppose what happened didn't really cover threats or aggressive behavior, but he wasn't about to send someone back there no matter how much of a tip that guy offered. We ended up calling the cops, obviously, not to get the guy in trouble or anything, but because we knew he needed help. I don't know what kind of mental health episode the guy was going through, but I sure as hell know what caused it. I don't know how I'm going to react when my mom passes. If it's after a long illness like what happened with a friend of mine, then I guess I'll be prepared for it. I'll have to be prepared for it. But if she died suddenly, if she was just there 1 minute and gone the next, thinking about that gives me a kind of window into that guy's thinking. And the thing that scares me most of all is I can kind of understand why he did it. He loved his mom, and he just wasn't mentally ready to let go yet. And honestly, I'm not sure we're ever ready to say goodbye to the woman who brought us into the world to begin with. Back when he was still with us, my dad used to tell this story about growing up in the Bronx in the 70s. His parents were too poor to give him an allowance, too poor to even feed him lunch sometimes, so round about the age of 9 going on to 10, my dad used to go down to this pizza place and just stare at all the pies until someone felt bad enough to give him a free slice. This somehow led to him becoming a part-time delivery boy, probably as a way of paying off all the sandwiches he ate, but the owner of the pizza place started feeling sorry for him and giving him a few bucks for dropping off slices or whole pizzas all over the neighborhood. I got lots of aunts and uncles, and I guess my grandparents were so busy raising them that they didn't mind the pizza guy keeping an eye on Dad, especially if he always came home with a few slices in his hands and a few dollars in his pocket. My dad said that every so often, the pizza place would get a very special kind of visitor. This visitor didn't wait in line. He never had to tell anyone his order, and he never paid for anything either. He was always the best-dressed guy in the shop. Everyone stepped aside to let him get to the counter, and whenever he visited, 2 huge goons always stood guard outside after eyeing up everyone inside. I'm sure there's a lot of you that have already put it together already, but for those that haven't, this guy was mobbed up. And not just mobbed up either. He was a made guy, real high up. And although he could get a table at just about any restaurant in the city, he liked to stop by the old neighborhood and pick up a slice or two at the same pizza place that he used to go to as a kid. It sounds kind of wholesome, and I guess it was in a way. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure he had his enemies, people who saw a different side to him, but he never caused any trouble with the shop, and having a made guy claiming that you had the best pizza in the Bronx was the best free advertising an old pizziolo could ever ask for. Anyways, one winter's evening, Dad finishes up with a few deliveries, which by that time he was doing on a bicycle that he bought with his own money. Pretty impressive for a 10-year-old if you ask me. To beat the rush of walking in the front of the shop during one of the busiest periods of the day, my dad used to ride his bike around the back and then walk in the back door of the place right into the kitchen so he could collect orders. He gets off his bike, walks inside the kitchen, but there's no one there. Then the next thing, he can hear some kind of heated argument in the front of the shop. It should have been loud as hell with how busy it normally got, but instead, my dad just hears two voices, one very angry and one clearly scared. He recognized the scared voice as his boss, the pizza place's owner, but he didn't recognize the angry one. Dad's about to just walk back out of the shop again until he realizes the voices are approaching the kitchen, and out of fear, he ducks down among all the flour sacks and tosses an empty one over himself to cover himself up, and he hides there as the voices get louder and louder. From what he could gather from listening in on the argument, his boss was having a disagreement with someone who had muscle with them, and they were very angry. He didn't really understand what they were talking about, but they kept using the name of the maid guy who used to stop in for slices. My dad said that he thought that it might have been the cops until the voices got louder and angrier and more afraid. Next thing, people were screaming at each other, and then one person is begging, then the next. There's a scream, loud and agonized and blood-curdling enough that my dad says he peed his pants out of fear. Not metaphorically either. I mean, he literally peed his pants thinking whatever was happening to the shop owner was going to happen to him next. He said that there was a whole bunch more screaming, then the sound of equipment being thrown around and glass smashing coming from the front of the shop. After that, all was quiet, all except the groans of the shop owner. Dad says that he was so scared that he didn't come out of hiding until the groans stopped too. He used to say that he felt guilt about that because he could have gotten the owner some help at some point, and I guess he passed out from the pain before my dad thought it was safe to come out. But when he did come out from under the empty sack of flour, he said he gasped when he saw the injuries that had been inflicted. The owner was lying on the floor, with all these burns running right down one side of his face, all the way down his neck too. And then there were more burns on one of his arms. Just feet away was one of those big old pizza trays that looked like it had come fresh out of an oven. Whoever it was, I'm assuming with the help of their goons, he heated up one of those big metal discs and then forced the owner to lie on it, face down. He used to say that more than 40 years later he could still remember the smell like it was yesterday. That burned cloth, burned flesh stink that crept into his nostrils as he stood there, totally horrified by what he was seeing. He said that he ran straight to the shop's phone to call 911, too young and naive to consider the implications of what just went down. Then he stayed until the ambulance arrived and the EMTs took his boss away to the hospital. The shops closed for a few weeks, and in that time, my dad and my grandpa went to visit the shop owner in his hospital bed. I'm pretty sure that he had had a bunch of surgeries, maybe even a skin graft if the burns were as bad as they sounded. He wanted to sell the shop too. He told my dad and grandpa so during their visit. He was getting older and wanted some money to enjoy his retirement with. He didn't admit to being scared or anything, but no one would be able to blame him if he was, you know. Anyways, my dad says that he walked away really sad. He loved that job and he felt angry at himself for not doing anything during the attack because, in his mind, if he'd ran and got help or something, his boss would be okay and he'd still have his job. But then, as it transpired, the pizza place owner had a bunch more visitors during his stay in the hospital, and one of those visitors was none other than that maid guy. They had a little talk, and once they were done, the owner decided to keep his place open just a little longer, at least until he could find someone to take the reins, so to speak. My dad says that he was over the moon when he got the news and asked my grandpa if that meant that they'd caught the guy who attacked his boss. Dad says my grandpa gave him this sort of half-sad, half-angry look and told him, maybe. But he knew. The whole neighborhood knew. Pretty much everyone except my dad, by the sounds of things. The guy who attacked the pizza place that night had been an associate of the maid guy who stopped by every so often. They'd had some kind of dispute, words were exchanged, and the attackers swore revenge against the maid guy. Only, because he's in the mob, there's next to nothing the aggrieved party can do. He doesn't have the position or the respect that the mob guy has, and he can't touch him or anything he owns. So instead, he goes after something the guy loves, and after a little research, this aggrieved party comes up with the wise idea of shutting down this guy's favorite pizza place, hopefully with permanent effect. Only, the pizza place owner is a civilian and a much-loved one at that, so when word gets out that this idiot put him in the hospital over a few harsh words at dinner one time, there was hell to pay. This guy gets a green light put on him almost immediately. Maid guy organizes a fake sit-down and boom, he and his goons each get one in the back of the head. And rumor has it that to put the shop owner's mind at ease, this mafia guy went to visit him in the hospital and showed him this big old ring his attacker was known to wear. As he swore that the owner would never get any trouble like that again, he takes out a little plastic wallet containing the guy's ring, still attached to the finger he always wore it on. Dad says that he worked there for a year or two afterwards, and after that, the owner finally put the place up for sale, and I think the place is some kind of corner store now, but I could be wrong. Anyways, that was a crazy story he always used to tell about how he almost got involved in mafia business, and since he's not around to tell it anymore, I figured that I'd just write it up and send it over. All the best with your channel. Me and my kid like to listen on long car drives, so if this story came up sometime, I think she'd get a kick out of hearing it again, especially if it came from you and not from me, for the 100th time. At around 8:30 a.m. on Monday, June 12th of 2006, Tony Spasato began his morning duties at the Southern California pizza place that he owned and operated. Located in Santa Clarita's Valencia Marketplace shopping mall, Mamma Mia New York-style pizza had enjoyed many profitable years, and this was in part thanks to Tony's tireless work ethic, a work ethic that was shared by many of Tony's co-workers, including 72-year-old Eddie Politelli. Even though his shift didn't officially start until 11 a.m., Eddie often showed up at around the same time Tony did and helped him prepare sauces and dough until the lunchtime delivery orders started to trickle in. That morning, Tony arrived to find the doors had already been unlocked, and when he walked inside, he could hear Eddie's voice coming from the back of the building. Yet the moment he heard it, he recognized fear in his old friend's words, and as he strained his ears to listen, he heard Eddie distinctly say, "Don't hurt me, I don't have anything." Tony then crept out of the front of the building and made his way around the back to get a better look at the situation from a safe distance, and that's when he saw Eddie. He had a look of pure terror on his face as he lay face up on the ground, scrambling to get away from a mysterious assailant who towered over him with a razor-sharp machete in one hand and a pistol in the other. But how did such a sweet, reliable older man come to be in such a horrifying situation? Edward John Politelli was born on August 5th of 1933 in the state of Rhode Island. Although very little is known of Eddie's early life, we know that he grew up in a small city just outside of Providence and was extremely close with his mother and father. He married a woman named Vilma, had at least one child with her, and despite the couple divorcing sometime in the early 1980s, they remained fairly close following the dissolution of their marriage. Eddie came from a law enforcement family, with some of his more distant relatives carrying a badge in New York and Maine. But Eddie's calling wasn't out on the streets, it was in the kitchen. He worked with me for 3 years, said a former co-worker, and he was a cook or a chef all of his life, a good one too. Records show that Eddie once cooked at the Aurora Civic Association, a members-only club established by Italian immigrants where he became well regarded for the quality of his dishes. He would later go on to own and operate his own restaurant for a time called Ed Polly's in Providence, Rhode Island. It was a popular venue, with Eddie becoming a much-loved member of the local community. He was selfless. He did anything for anybody, said family friend Stephanie Capricchio. He was like a second father to me. Yet tragically, in the year 2000, Eddie's firstborn son was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and passed away shortly afterwards. His passing devastated Eddie, and it appeared the untimely nature inspired him to make an abrupt change in his life. He suddenly decided to move from his native Rhode Island all the way out to the sunny, sandy beaches of Southern California and moved into a senior living complex just off Sierra Highway. There, he lived alone with his pet beagle, Lolly, and occupied himself by learning the drums, watching crime dramas, and, above all, indulging his passion for cooking. Eddie soon found work at Mamma Mia New York-style pizza and once again found himself a popular member of the community. He was the greatest, recalls longtime friend and fellow Rhode Islander Tony Pano. He could whip up something out of nothing, and when you taste it, it's incredible. By the summer of 2006, Eddie had settled into his new life in Santa Clarita, and even though he should have been enjoying his retirement, he regularly volunteered his services in preparing and delivering pizzas. On the morning of June 12th, Eddie met with the produce delivery man at around 8:10 a.m., then, after enjoying a few coffees together, the delivery man departed. However, just minutes later, another person entered the pizza place, and armed with that huge machete later spotted by Tony Spasato, they chased Eddie into the alleyway behind the restaurant. This is when owner and operator Tony Spasato arrived, and after creeping around the side of the business, he was spotted by the terrified Eddie, who called out, "Tony, help me, he's got a gun." Eddie's words were a brief distraction to his attacker, who peeled around to see who was there. Eddie spotted an opportunity to escape, but his attacker was too quick. He grabbed Eddie by the shirt collar, jerked him backwards until he hit the ground, then began violently slashing at him with a machete. Tony fled, attempting to contact 911 as he did so, but for some reason, he was unable to get a connection. Suddenly, Tony spotted a truck surrounded by a group of landscapers. He ran over to them, grabbed one of their shovels, then rushed back to Eddie's aid after begging the landscapers to call 911. When he returned to the alley, Eddie was a mess of hacked-up flesh, yet still his attacker plunged the machete into his flesh. Tony later said that he yelled, "He's just an old man, leave him alone," but the assailant didn't stop. It was only when Tony approached that the armed man turned and began swinging the machete at him. Then once Tony had been driven back, the machete-wielding murderer made his escape in a silver Dodge station wagon which had been parked nearby. Paramedics rushed to the scene, arriving less than 15 minutes after the initial 911 call, but sadly, they arrived far too late to save Eddie's life, and the 72-year-old passed away as a result of his wounds. His autopsy would reveal defensive wounds on his right hand, stabs to his left chest and lower abdomen, vertical stabs to his solar plexus and chest bone, cuts to his left ear, and superficial cuts to his lower back. Some reports stated that Eddie had lost approximately 25% of all the blood in his body, with splatter marks being observed along the entirety of the pizza place's 10-foot rear wall. It had been pure carnage, and Eddie never stood a chance. News of his untimely death sent shockwaves through the entire region. Friends and relatives went into a period of deep mourning, while the wider public was horrified that such a brutal, bloody murder could occur in broad daylight, not to mention in an area people believed was safe. Over the next few days, the level of foot traffic at Valencia Marketplace dropped off significantly, while employees were warned to be on the lookout for suspicious characters. The same level of fear remained for weeks afterwards, with some of the mall's businesses instituting radical but temporary safety measures to maintain the security of their employees. Jason Moses, manager at a nearby Cost Plus outlet, told reporters, "He was such a nice guy. It hurt when I found out. He wasn't out to hurt anybody, and he'd give you the shirt off his back if you needed it. I can't imagine him having any enemies, and if he did, he sure kept quiet about it." Eddie's remains were flown back to Rhode Island, where he was buried alongside his mother and father. His funeral marked a tragic end to a long and fruitful life, but many unanswered questions remained, the primary one being, Why would such a sweet older man be singled out for such a brutal, bloody, and barbaric death? As the LA County Sheriff's Department began investigating the murder, they realized that they were faced with a near impossible task. It doesn't look like robbery. It looks like it was personal, claimed Detective Charles Morales, citing the savagery with which the attacks were carried out. According to him, no failed robbery would have resulted in such flagrant violence, especially since Eddie posed almost no threat to the armed suspect. Yet aside from this rough theory, homicide detectives had no idea who their suspect was, and no idea why Eddie might have been targeted, so they started to dig. According to a handful of witnesses, Tony Sposato had engaged in a heated argument with a customer just a few days prior to Eddie's murder. Yet despite this customer somewhat matching the description of the killer, the lead proved to be an investigative dead end, and no suspect was ever arrested. Without any hard evidence and only one reliable witness, the investigation into Eddie's murder cooled, then eventually turned cold. But in the nearly 2 decades since his death, there has been intense speculation regarding the nature of it. One of the first details which came into question was Eddie's cry of, "Help me, he's got a gun." Tony Sposato later claimed that he'd seen a machete in one of the attacker's hands and a pistol in the other. Yet if that was the case, why did the killer choose to butcher his victim as opposed to execute them with the pistol? One seemingly satisfactory answer to that question is that it wasn't a pistol at all, but rather a stun gun, and if this was the case, it might provide a chilling insight into the killer's motives. The restaurant next to the pizza place was a kind of Mexicali fusion joint named Cabo Cabana Fresh Baja Grill, and when police obtained their security camera footage, it showed a person walking by the restaurant in the minutes prior to the attack. This person seemed to be aware that the camera inside of the closed restaurant pointed out in the direction of the parking lot, as he seemed to turn his head away at the last second so that a significant glimpse of his face would not be captured by the camera. This suspect appeared to be wearing a dark-colored shirt or jacket along with pale blue jeans. In the days that followed the acquisition of this security camera footage, the LA County Sheriff released a description of their suspect. He was either Caucasian or pale Latino, anywhere between the ages of 25 to 30 years old, and stood at 5'7" and 160 pounds. He was also believed to be clean-shaven, with short dark hair that Tony Sposato described as spiky. Police also sought to trace the silver Dodge Magnum their suspect used as a getaway vehicle, extending their search as far as Arizona in order to single out their culprit. Yet without a definitive license plate number, the search proved fruitless, even following the offer of a $10,000 reward. Many believe that Eddie's murderer was someone with a grudge against them, or possibly someone hired to kill Eddie so brutally that it would send some kind of message. Yet as we previously discussed, Eddie seemed to be a very popular man with certainly no moral enemies to speak of. However, some have noted that in the aftermath of his death, only a single granddaughter spoke regarding her grief. It's understandable that the rest of Eddie's family wished for privacy at such a difficult time, but some have theorized that this veil of anonymity was sought out of fear rather than grief, and that they too feared reprisals for some mysterious indiscretion. If that was the case, then there's a chance that Eddie was involved in organized crime to some capacity, and if we follow that particular avenue of investigation, we come across a curious but compelling little detail. Many of Eddie's friends recalled that he enjoyed betting on horse races. He would go to Santa Anita Park for the horse racing, one said. He would always tell me about them too, if he won or lost, and he mostly lost. It might make for little more than conjecture, but if Eddie happened to owe money to people, violent people, then this might explain such a sudden and savage attack. Just 3 months after Eddie's murder, the LA County Sheriff's Department began diverting resources away from the investigation. Almost every single lead they'd followed in those 3 short months had come to nothing, and despite being a very outgoing person, Eddie Politelli most definitely led a very private personal life. Almost every attempt to probe it had proven fruitless, leaving huge gaps in law enforcement's characterization of him. People thought Eddie just sat at home, watched TV, or walked his dog. But as we dig deeper, some less wholesome aspects of his character seem to emerge. We know that he had a penchant for gambling, but perhaps his interest in TV crime dramas has a greater significance than previously anticipated. Perhaps at some point in his life, Eddie was indeed involved in organized crime, and although people assume that his son's death prompted his migration from New England, perhaps there are other reasons why he chose to start a new life on the opposite side of the country. Detective Charles Morales, who previously worked on the case, disagrees with this theory, saying it was merely a crime of opportunity committed by some kind of transient